City of Stevens Point Special Police and Fire Commission meeting, recorded May 17, 2023.
So I guess we will call to order the Special Police and Fire Commission meeting of May 17th, 2023. And if you could please call the roll, Mr. Kirschling is on his way.
Moore.
Here.
Mrozek. Here. Ostrowski.
Here.
Zenner.
Here. Wonderful. Everyone will be here very soon. Agenda item number 2, really the only agenda item we have this morning, is revisions to the policies and procedures for the Police and Fire Commission, a project that was started years ago that we are finally taking on again. The reason for this meeting, and here comes Mr. Kirschling, so I'll just take a second before we move any further, so that we don't have to keep repeating things. Make for some boring television for the folks out there that are actually awake watching us.
Mr. Kirschling. Turning us. Traffic was horrendous out there, just horrendous.
Rush hour.
Freeway.
Stevens Point rush hour hits again.
Well, it's not too bad. It's 1 minute.
Okay, so we've called roll. You're here, present, accounted for.
I'm here.
The purpose of this meeting is to start the process of revising the policies and procedures to bring them up to date, to match some of the procedures and policies of the rest of the city, to clarify some things that have become outdated and changed. The Stevens Point Police and Fire Commission has the authority by state statute to create these documents and to vote on them as a majority in the way that we want them to be. The city attorney is here to give us help and make sure the things that we do are correct legally and match with state statute so that we don't run into conflicts in the future. But we are the ones in authority to have the final say over each section of this document. So, Mr. Attorney, if there's something you would like to add, I would welcome that at this time.
Sure. Okay, so kind of for starters, broad strokes, what do these things need to do? What do they not need to do? And, just going through, got a copy of, I believe some of you at least had been looking at the manual for PFCs provided by so looking through that, there's actually not a whole lot of content in there specifically about policy, but what it does say about it is that there are 2 key areas of concern. First and kind of foremost, statutory responsibility in terms of appointing personnel to the PD and the FD. That goes for all PFCs, independent of optional powers. And second, rules on how the commission conducts its business. First, with regards to just basic organizational rules. Second, with rules with regards to disciplinary procedures. Now, of course, here we also have optional powers aspects to address in terms of, day-to-day, I shouldn't say day-to-day, oversight management of FDPD, as well as budgetary financial stuff within the realm of those things that are under your purview. So it needs to accomplish all that. What it doesn't need to do is overly specify a gazillion things and procedures that don't demand things be in writing. And looking at the old ones, I'm sure plenty of you have seen examples in there. I mean, we don't need a policy on how to make coffee in the morning. So. In particular, we had all talked about a couple times over the last few years this sort of cumbersome aspects of the chief appointment procedure as it's laid out in here. So identifying the types of places where this can be pared down in the sense of creating more flexibility to do things in a way that makes sense given the circumstances and given the preferences that arise at the time. So obviously I sent an email around to everyone yesterday. I did hear some discussion right as I walked in about small print. I don't actually really ever think about that because I'm always viewing this on a computer screen. You can make it whatever size you want. But Obviously, you can see some of the comments that I've begun putting in there, and just some sort of, like, for instance, looking at the very first section, all the text in red there at the top. That's brand new stuff that I added that didn't exist before, and it's just sort of laying out, here's what these are, here's what they do, identifying some acronyms so that things can be done in a consistent shorthand throughout the document, that type of thing. Since the last time these were comprehensively updated, we've had some very basic elemental changes. We no longer have the administrative assistant to the PFC. Like, that position doesn't exist anymore. I always forget her name that held that role for ages.
Leanne?
Leanne?
Oh, not Leanne. I'm specifying the wrong person. Who had the office in the basement at the old place that terrified me with its stacks of paper documents that went to the sky.
Helen?
No.
Sally?
Sally.
Sally.
McGee.
Sally.
Who's actually here today, so.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I haven't seen her in ages, but yeah, her position doesn't exist anymore. And there are references not only in this policy, but also in the ordinances to that position, which it's not here. So obviously, need to identify anything like that and take it into account. The changes with regards to the management structure in the fire department. I'm guessing that at least a time or two in here, that'll pop up. Some changes have been made over the years in response to the changing legal landscape. I know we did update it to reflect residency requirements when the Supreme Court case came down on that. Obviously, that's something that largely gets governed based upon the collective bargaining agreements with the unions, independent of what we actually put in here. And anything that is, anything that appears in here which is, not permissible under law, it doesn't matter what this says, you can't apply it. So my hope today was to just kind of give that sort of introduction, and then, start to go through sort of the style of edits I'm making to this, which is why I wanted to get at least some of them in your hands ahead of time. Obviously, there's some changes that there's some sections that don't really have much at all that I've done so far. I mean, officers of the commission, I corrected some capitalization. I'll probably look at that again in the future as we get towards a final version here. But I'm just curious to hear feedback. I'm curious to hear from the members if there are particular policy changes that you want to see put into practice in here. The things where it's just sort of, political decisions to be made by this body. It's obviously easier for me to know those sooner rather than later, so I can start working on language for it, so that I can reach out to other colleagues and other sources of content if need be. So just sort of an open discussion as kind of a kickoff for this process.
Okay, I think with that, Joe, do you have any points or ideas that you see or want to let the attorney know of now? I'm just going to go around the table and ask everybody.
Go ahead and start with Denise.
All right.
Because she's
Because
yeah.
you've been actively working on this.
I think, through discussion working with the PFC, working with the attorney, working with just trying to get a start to this, trying to get this project undertaken and have it established in one place, because I think that's a lot of the confusion that we have is documents here, who's updating, who's this and that. As far as with the attorney being here and, working with us, and I think that's the key here. We have control over it, but Attorney Beveridge is going to be the one who's going to be the working document here, so we have it in one place. As far as each of our individual sections, I would assume that everyone's taken, the time to look at theirs and noting any particular changes that need to be made. And as we work through each section, it would be my understanding that at that time, we would have some input. I think a lot of this too is it's just really cleaning up the language. It's making things more simplified, because I think in a lot of areas, we've got it too complicated, as Attorney Beveridge has stated to begin with. And, I'm in agreement with that. We don't need to make this harder than it needs to be. So I think that, however we want to lead this, if we want to go, section by section, working through, and I see that already Attorney Beveridge has made, quite a few changes there with some sidebars as to, some really good questions.
Okay.
Why do we have things there? What are we doing, right? When someone new comes on, what are we supplying to them, right?
Right.
Our record keeping, things like that, so.
Okay, Mr. Zenner.
My main focus, obviously, was Section 3, and that's what I was looking at some of the revised or proposed revisions. I do agree with quite a few of them. The one other one, and Logan, you were talking about that, under Section 3.04, it says chief and assistant chiefs are considered to be exempt positions. Obviously, with the changes on the fire department, that includes, a handful, I think 4 or 5 other positions that would go in there. So I don't know, looking at what makes sense today, what's going to make sense 10 years from now? Is there a way that can be worded, non-represented individuals that fall under the city pay plan, or something that leaves it a little bit more generic? So a revision doesn't need to be done anytime, positional name or structure.
Yeah, I hadn't actually reached that section yet in terms of my recent updates. And, just for everyone's information, I think I might have made this clear previously, but the work that I had done on these previously was from like 2014. And back then, I had so many fewer instances of internal discussions about FLSA, exempt, non-exempt, overtime issues that, when I went through that section, I didn't have that sort of knowledge base and experience to draw upon in the same way I do now. Absolutely agree with you that it makes sense to not enumerate a whole bunch of positions. Like, there's no reason that this shouldn't just include references to Fair Labor Standards Act. It does here, but to make those a bit more specific and, use some of the actual language from the Fair Labor Standards Act would be my first instinct. Mention the different categories of exemptions. Say employees who fit these categories will be treated as exempt. Then you can review them as needed, and those types of determinations can be made. And then typically you're going to see that put into a job description. So.
Okay. The other thing that I noticed, and this kind of jumps into another section too. I could see why it was written that particular way, and the Police and Fire Commission has followed this process, but, and this would actually affect your position, following Act 10, when we had civilian employees within the police department that had a union that was citywide. When Act 10 came through, obviously that changed the landscape. We do have civilian employees that are assigned and work for the police department, and their wages fall under the budget of the PFC, yet those individuals still report through a process as an employee of the city, which obviously they are, but the Police and Fire Commission does oversee those positions, and essentially we supervise those positions. I don't know if that's something we want to discuss here, because that's a whole different animal, but when you're looking at language within this, that might be a discussion we may want. Do those positions report to the Police and Fire Commission, or which essentially under the statute indicates they would, or do we keep it as it's currently being handled?
Very good.
Just something to think about. And lastly, and there's a lot of red on this already, was the hiring process and city attorney, I recall that well. In 2014, I was in the management role, and really looking at the process that's identified here, I don't recall things looking quite like that, but how it was piecemealed. One thing I recall in particular when we went to the Lexipol policy with the PD, and I know the fire department's under Lexipol now, terms will and shall are not something you might want to use unless it is state or federal law, and the word may is a lot better. There's processes identified in here that, again, maybe in 2014 made sense or fit the bill. And that's different now in 2023, and what's that going to look like in 2030. Even looking at the PFC manual, I think more of listed in that paragraph, not how many people should be on a board and who should be on that board and what that board would look like. More, are we going to do a written exam, which I don't really see at all in any chief of police. Terms of, oral or the interview boards, not just one, may you interview or interviews is probably more appropriate. And maybe listing a pool of outside individuals that may be used. I think the city attorney is a good one to be on those, even sitting right now as a proctor to ensure that we're following policy, procedure, and state and federal law. But that would be about really the only one. I'm just spitballing and throwing it out there. That makes sense. I can understand the mayor or even others, department heads, but that I think is more appropriate to make a decision when you're going through the screening process and what that process will look like when that position is open. Not so restrictive as to what is listed here.
That particular section is going to need to be revised very strongly.
Right, and a lot of the points that the city attorney put on the side, and the bullet on the side that I would like to address, and I guess it's a little bit different than how the city attorney looks at it, would be if non-PFC individuals are involved, it seems heavy-handed for the PFC to screen what questions they ask. Yes and no. I think any individual that's on the board obviously has that position to ask a particular question, but how is that going to be rated? In many ways, during my position here at the PD, we revised that process. How subjective or objective do you want that process to look? If we have particular questions that are being asked, we also need to provide what is the desired responses that we want to use for more objectiveness in that rating process. Again, I think going down to that level, saying this is the process we're going to do, that's something that would be decided at a screening, or what process we're going to use when that hiring is done. So anyways, that just my going through it quick and looking at points that I think we need to address moving forward.
Thank you.
You mentioned one thing that jumped out at me there, which is, like the Lexipol policies. Obviously we've got volumes of policies and procedures contained within those in, both departments. To the extent that they touch upon things that are proper subjects for this document, my plan is to just have the conversations with the chiefs to figure out, what are our actual practices that we're doing? Do they work well? Do they need to be changed? If they don't need to be changed, it's more just a matter of making sure that this harmonizes with what those policies and procedures are.
Right.
Just so that we have an accurate reflection of what we're actually doing.
Absolutely. Obviously, we've just gotten the revision document that is not complete yet by any means. And it's a first go-around of probably many to come. I'm not going to go into my personal feelings about this document at this time because we're all going to share that stuff at later times, later meetings, and all of those things. some of the things I would suggest that you remember about is understanding why we have optional powers and what that exactly means as far as a government body and a police and fire commission, because that really does weigh on what this document will say. Another thing I would suggest is if you go through your section, figure out what you agree with, what you disagree with, have a conversation with the city attorney so you can find out if you disagree with something because of the right reasons, or if it's state statute and you disagree with it, but it's state statute and we have to do it anyway. That's just the way it goes. But so we can get a rough draft so that we can bring it before the entire group and we can have a discussion on it, but we're not wasting a lot of time at this level going over things for the first time and that kind of thing. We can get it in a draft and move things forward in an organized fashion so we can discuss it, vote on it, and move it forward. Because otherwise, we're going to be here for decades doing this, and it'll never get done. And so I suggest everyone be in touch with the city attorney, have some ideas of what section of your particular section that you would like to see changed, have a discussion with him, get on some footing, and if you guys can't agree, that's fine. Bring it to the commission, and we'll all hash it out and figure out where we can find some common ground and make it work for the city. That's what this is
You had
about.
mentioned about each of us going through our own section. Mr. President, do you have any objection to going through the rest of the document to make changes or not make changes, but suggestions to other
Absolutely.
things?
But you can absolutely do that. I would like everybody at this point to focus on their own section so that we can move the whole document forward.
Well, I have none in my section, and neither does the attorney, so.
And because, and that's fine. Everyone will get, when it's brought back to the body, everyone will get a voice in changing the rest of the document. What we're trying to do is move this
understand.
forward.
I
figured, yeah. So
understand.
that's where you get your shot at the whole document.
Got it.
So, and if you do have a good suggestion, please give it to the city attorney for a different section, because that way it'll get passed on to other people as we discuss this document, whatever's legal that we can pass on.
I understand.
Yeah, and just speaking to sort of process and efficiency here, obviously this is going to take multiple additional meetings, but in terms of, on my end, the best way to speed this up is for you to get comments to me via email at any time you come up with them. Now,
Can we call you?
that works too.
All right.
Try to do some stuff in batches. Like if, it's easier for me to address a half dozen things in one communication than a trickle of 6 individual communications over the course of some period of time. But do not wait until you get in this room to share those with me, because then it'll be, oh, I hadn't looked at that part. It's easier for me to get that information ahead of time so that when we're actually having the thing that really takes up people's scheduled time, a meeting, we can, I can already have done some work on it.
And that's what we're trying to organize here. Mr. Ostrowski, you've been fairly quiet in this procedure. What do you have to share?
Well, I can only speak, I did study everybody's section as well as my own, and it's amazing, a couple of things that the attorney already has highlighted are 2 things that I had on mind, but there's 2 things I don't know. For instance, the section 20.01, his first comment about the transferring of funds, that's something I found interesting, because the departments, in a sense, have shifted funds around as long as the total budget came out all right. There was never any discussion. The other thing is dropping down on that same page, the members taking part in a contract negotiation. I'm assuming they're referring mainly to the fire department union contract and the police department contract. I don't ever remember a commissioner being in those discussions.
It's been a long time.
Yeah, so I found those interesting. The other thing, two things that I found that nobody mentions is, one is in the handbook from Wisconsin Police and Fire Commissioners, they allude to the idea of a president, vice president, and secretary. We have operated, as long as I've been here, with president and secretary, with the secretary acting as a vice president in the absence of them. So I guess, is that a problem, or is that just our okay way to operate? I have found it to be fine, but I don't want to be in trouble with the state. And my last comment would be the exit interviews started all of this. And I don't see it in part of this. Does it need to become part of it?
And it will.
Okay.
I think it was just kind of,
That would be my thing.
Okay. The other thing that I was going to mention, and I had forgot to bring up, is that, and this is something that we've done as long as I've been on the commission, and I understand why, because of the efficiency of it, is that it says in this book that we should approve all the bills before they're paid by the comptroller treasurer. And everything we do is a month behind, but that's the way the city works as a whole. But that's a shall from state statute. Is there anything that we can do about that? Is there any, should we? I mean, we're all blissfully ignoring that in a certain extent.
So, which is exactly why my comment under 2.01 is, how does this square with our actual real practices? I can tell you that my level of confidence in the appropriateness of our financial procedures comes from the fact that we're audited every year. And they get down and dirty with our controls on finance. And if there was anything, amiss about that, they would let us know. So it's likely that whatever, the procedures are is okay from a legal perspective. It's just a matter of, would we like them to work a little differently? Would we like to fine tune them for our own, whether it's ease of use, transparency, et cetera. And that's probably going to start with a conversation with me and Corey, and bring the chiefs in on it and say, like, how are we actually doing this? And what should this document contain in that regard? Jumping back real quick to Bob, your comment about contracts. So section 2.02, it's actually section 4.04 that covers specifically the collective bargaining agreements and the way that those are negotiated. So the word contract there is a little ambiguous in the sense that, you certainly can refer to a contract with the unions. But 2.02, I believe, is really meant to address more like, if we contract with an IT company or we contract with a cell phone provider.
Regular business operations,
Exactly.
So we should clarify that in this document so that it's not
Yep.
misunderstood.
because I don't think we've ever.
Yeah. So what I can do is insert something, 2.02, put something in there to specify that that section is not talking about collective bargaining agreements. See section 404 for that.
Yeah, we need to clarify that in some manner. Is there anything else? I don't want to spend a lot of time beating this horse today because this is just an initial, let's get started and get some serious work done kind of meeting.
I had one thing I was going to bring up, and I didn't
Yeah.
touch it on it before, but the exit interviews, that's being included into this? Okay, so I didn't want to address that until I knew this for sure. But at the bottom, it's identifying that this record, and I brought this up before, will be held with the Human Resources Department. Personnel files at the police department, and I'm assuming, I'd have to check with the FD, but are maintained at this location.
Right.
I'm assuming that exit interview would go with the personnel file when the officer leaves. And correct me if I'm wrong, I think we need to hold those for 30 years, or for an extended period of time after an individual retires or leaves. Why are we not keeping that exit interview with the personnel file and at the location where they're maintained.
And this is a discussion that will happen when we get to this section of the contract or the policies and procedures. I understand where you're going, and I agree with you that we have to figure this out. We're just not there yet. I don't know
Okay.
what section this is going to go into. This is going to be included somehow in here. And when we get to that point, then we'll hash out the fine tuning of this document to make it work the way it needs to work, because.
I didn't want to address that until I knew that was actually what we were just
Absolutely.
talking about
Yep.
today. So,
And the
But
only
it-
thing I can say to that is that when Sandy, and she's the one, our human resources manager is the one who sets everything up. She provides the questionnaire, she kind of leads it, we can have our input too when we're going through an exit interview. She maintains the notes and then the final record, because there are some things that a person will say, I want this off the record. So it's like a sidebar, that's not going on that form itself. I don't know if how that would all flow into, coming back, because of the fact that the exit interview is an opportunity for the people who are leaving to be able to speak freely and not have a fear, I guess, if there are things that are off the record or potentially, that could affect existing people who are still working there. So that's the only thought process and I know you haven't had an opportunity to sit in one yet, but that was kind of.
well, again, that's my concern. Now you have a document that's floating around that may have information such as that, when that should go into a personnel file that is going to be kept. Now, do we have another file that, or where's it going? It only makes sense that when an individual leaves an agency, that there's one file that is kept, if there's a background or any type of review 10 years down the line, or however, all the documentation is there. If we have this exit interview that something comes of it, how do we locate it? Now, is there a separate file that is just for exit interviews that's not even kept at the location where the personnel
So
records are kept?
Right, I hear your concern is that where it actually resides, and I think that since you're not assigned to this section too, is I can reach out to Sandy and just say exactly, finding out what is included in this file. And it is kept under, lock and key. It is, that's my understanding, it's kept in her office, which is under lock and key, and it also comes to a point of, I guess you have to have trust in the position, right? We all have levels, of
See,
positions.
let me just interject here quickly that the biggest problem that comes with this is that's an elective situation that not every employee does. So if it's outside of their personnel record, nobody else knows that they even did an exit interview. 10 years from now, you and I won't remember who we did exit interviews with unless they were so shocking that they left an impression. But if you go back to look for that file, you don't know if that person did an exit interview or not, so you wouldn't even know to look at the exit interview files for them, depending on where they are. If it's in their personnel file, you go to their personnel file and there it is. That's part of the difficulty that's going to come out of this.
Who has access to the personnel file?
Here, they're in my office, and then.
Do chiefs have access to the personnel
Yes.
file
But
whenever
no
they
one
want to
else.
go through them?
Nobody else can go through them except, somebody can go through their own personnel file. They have to let me know when they want to do that,
Yep.
and then they can just go through their own. But the chiefs and the assistant chiefs can look through personnel files.
Do they have to be justified, or is it willy-nilly whenever they want to do it?
Yeah, they just open the drawer and they look. But after hours, my office is locked. Nobody can go in. And then
But the way
all,
we're talking, it sounds like when you're an employee, your records are in your place of employment. But when you're having an exit interview, you become a city employee and your exit interview is downtown. It sounds like your
At this
status
point in time.
changes.
No, it doesn't change. I think that was just the process that we adopted at that point. So we have the consistency of an exit interview. In this case, it was Sandy. At that point, I think it was Lisa. But what becomes of the document is the question. I think the city maintains a medical file. I'd have to check on that.
Benefits in general.
See, and this
Benefits,
is,
but
this
not-
is something I want everybody to think about. We're not going to settle this right now, but
Who comes across it,
Yeah.
or what document, who observes it, I can understand that concern, but if an individual's leaving, they can go through, or in this case, the entity can look at a personnel file. It just seems like that's the most logical place for that document to reside after an individual resigns or retires.
Just to clarify, there's the literal, like, physical access aspect of these files, but then within a personnel file, there's a bunch of different types of documents in there. And if you had, say, a records request, just from some member of the public, for the entire personnel file of employee so-and-so, you'd have to scrutinize individual components of it under the open records law. It's likely that a huge amount of it would have to be disclosed, not all of it, obviously. And you have to make those determinations on a case-by-case basis. With regards to an exit interview, it's overwhelmingly likely that that would not be a confidential document. The open records law doesn't really contemplate an exit interview specifically. And unless an exit interview contained allegations that were going to, lead to some sort of investigation, that, otherwise it's just, here are my comments about, my working conditions, my, satisfaction with the rate of pay I was receiving, my musings about the office climate, that type of stuff. Most of that stuff would be public record. Now, that doesn't mean we go and, publish it in the newspaper, but you have to make those determinations if and when you receive the requests and judge them on a case-by-case basis.
We don't have to go through this right now. My first thought of what Logan had said is, do we need a disclosure to the employee beforehand? I don't know.
that's a question for him.
Well, the comments about, off the record, records are records.
It's not a
So,
newspaper article. Yeah.
I always tell people everything is an open record other than what you say and what you think. The second you put pen to paper, unless it's your own personal notes that you never share with anyone, then it's a record, and you've got to scrutinize it under those rules. So, in theory, you could be taking notes on something, and you could just stop taking notes. You've heard the information. You're not writing it down because they'd prefer for it to be kept that way. You can share that verbally with the management staff who, ought to know what was said in order to try to improve things or make changes in response to it. But it does get a little dicey because, as we kind of, as a body, learned a few years ago, anonymous documents can lead to complicated situations. So I think that's a really interesting question that merits some careful thought. That's something I'd actually like to pitch to some of my colleagues around the state. How do you handle it when somebody in an exit interview wants to say something but not have it attributed to them?
Yeah, and
Because I'm sure that happens all the time.
And I think just because we've dealt and focused on this, so many times, and right, this is kind of what's brought us to where we are today. I think getting some input, as Logan said, from, other areas, because what I found out too is, the chiefs, of our departments, as far as what other PFCs do, they can get the information way faster than any one of us, because I've tried to reach out to
Absolutely.
I've tried to reach out to other PFCs, like, what do you do? And I do believe that what we're doing here too with the exit interview, it's kind of derived from some of the things that we've been through in the last couple of years. But we're unique in this because, from my understanding, other PFCs, This is all handled at the HR level. The PFCs are not even involved in the exit interview. It's there, but then I hear from our chief saying, no, we want you guys to be involved. We want you to be there because then it's a more direct correlation with knowing the department, knowing, and sometimes too, when you are in an exit interview, coming to the knowledge too of understanding their union contract, right? And sometimes too, it's having an opportunity at that point in time to say, I hear that you're unhappy with
Right.
this portion of it.
We need to kind of get back to the
Yeah.
agenda and not
But I'm
talk
saying, I
about
think,
exit
yeah,
interviews
but I'm saying, I
anymore.
think that that's where we should leave it with Attorney Beveridge, is just kind of saying, reaching out to colleagues, just saying, however we're going to do this, it's done by the books,
Yep.
right? And I could be in agreement that we at least let him bring back to us what his thoughts and findings are.
And just one kind of general comment, I mean, it certainly pertains to this. You got to remember with some of these aspects of this document, what the scale of our community is. We're 26,000 people. We have departments of such and such size, roughly 40 to 55 employees, sworn on each side. That allows, just based on scale and bandwidth of these human beings in this room, to have a certain level of more direct, I don't want to use the word micromanagement, but granular involvement.
Interaction.
Yeah. Whereas in a community that's even just 2 or 3 times the size, that would just be really impractical. And I mean, you try to picture like the Milwaukee PFC doing exit interviews, that's all they would do. They'd be like full-time employees.
Yeah.
So we would just, keep that in mind, like to what extent do you want to have that really direct involvement with some of this stuff? And exit interviews is certainly one of those places where that, the rubber meets the road on that. So that's going to get a lot of attention, obviously, and possibly ends up being a, maybe an individual meeting just to talk about that, since it's been such a hot button topic the last 6-8 months.
I think so. If we got a document that is specifically identifying an exit interview, and we're having this big of a discussion on it, yet we don't know where it gets held when a person leaves, I think that's kind of a big problem. I think we need to address that.
Yeah, and I think part of that arose from, for a bit it was, we're going to not have the chief participate in the exit interview. We're also not going to share the contents of it with the chief. And I remember having a telephone conversation with the two of you, I believe, and Chief Moody, if I recall, earlier this year, where it was, well, if we're trying to gather this information so that we can make improvements to the departments, not sharing that information with the person who runs the department is maybe a little counterproductive. So I think it was, some of the current procedures or the, procedures we talked about using were being a bit too much informed by current events rather than great ideas. So certainly we can, now that we've got sort of the decks clear to a certain extent on some of the things we were working through, we're in a much better position to make good policy.
So back to the policies and procedures as a whole. Does everybody understand what we're trying to accomplish here? Does everybody understand the procedure we would like to use to communicate with the city attorney to move this project forward? Okay, do we have any?
I have a quick question. Logan, did you compare this document with any other optional power, just to see if there's anything we're missing or any bright ideas that, oh boy, that works, or, maybe we shouldn't have this because of that?
I have tried. Thus far, I don't have any complete comparable documents from anyone who's optional powers, unless, Tom, do you know, is West Allis an optional powers city? I know there's very few. I mean, there's only like, what?
14.
14
Yeah.
of them.
Yeah.
So it's not a ton.
I know
Is
there
West-
was a document that we had that had them all listed down at one point.
Well,
I want to say West Dallas or West Bend. Or it's West something.
Did West Allis just leave? One of them down in that corner of the state just gave up their optional powers.
I don't think so, because probably the person down there who sent their policies to me might have mentioned that, but Yeah, I've generally put out the call to a lot of different communities asking for their policies. I didn't get a whole lot back, which leads me to suspect that in a lot of places, these things have been treated not all that differently than what we've got here. So there's not really, thus far, anything that I found that can serve as just like, here's a great model. Because trust me, if I find one, you'll know, because there would be a whole lot of red ink, like copy, paste.
Yeah,
So
we'll all be doing that, yeah. I know Marshfield is optional powers.
I know Chief Kuso was very helpful with getting in
Yeah.
contact with other chiefs and saying, just get me a copy of this, send it over. It seems like if you work through the chiefs, you can get the policies from other cities a lot faster.
So does anybody else have any other questions about what we're trying to get accomplished here? Okay, all I can say is review your sections, and Joe, in your case, go nuts. Do you have any other?
What's our time frame for getting together next?
Well, I don't see, Logan, you're the one that's doing the hard work here with rearranging words and all of that.
I think that, just to give you a sense of scale on the time investment, I'm picturing that what I've put into this so far maybe represents 10 to 15% of the overall time it's going to take me to produce what I think is a full, decent draft of it. So I'm expecting that maybe 3 weeks from now or something, I can have a full draft provided to everyone, and then we can take it from there. I do want to say one quick more little thing about content. I absolutely agree with paring this down where it can be pared down, but there are two specific spots that I'd like you, even if you haven't had these sections assigned to you, that are going to get quite a bit bigger, and that is 4.05 union grievances and 5.01 disciplinary actions.
Yeah.
I'm gonna, especially with the disciplinary actions, my plan is to rewrite that to almost look like a miniature rules of civil procedure. Here's how we conduct, here's how we schedule, conduct these types of hearings. We've had some real reps on it. We've learned some lessons. It needs to preserve flexibility, but it also needs to create very clear procedural rules so that the attorneys involved can follow them. So expect to see quite a bit more on those two.
So I guess with that, Logan, what would be an anticipated timeframe to schedule another special
Yeah.
meeting so we can kind of get that within our
A month from now?
schedules?
Yeah, I'd say, mid-June is probably a good idea. I have the Municipal Attorneys Conference that comes up in mid-June. I believe that is, let me take a look.
We don't need to go over that right now. Candy, if you can organize and find a time that this room is free and reach out to everyone, including the city attorney, and figure out when a meeting would work, that would be great.
Yeah, like the week of the 19th, maybe. Maybe a good one to look at for me.
Good, now we have a basis. So somewhere around the 19th, look at your schedules and we'll figure out a time, and it'll be right here again.
Do you want another morning meeting?
I don't care. Either one, we can do it.
I think that works. I think if you do the 19th through the 23rd, because the next weekend is, or the next week is the U.S. Senior Open, and that's going to be,
Yeah, I'm in favor of a morning meeting as
Morning,
well.
yeah.
That's,
so, yeah. that-
whatever works for the most people, we'll make it then, and that's fine. So get together with Candy or whatever, and we'll figure it out. Until then, if there's no more questions or comments, we are adjourned. Thank you very much.
A video of this meeting is available for viewing on the city's website, stevenspoint.com/videos.